All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and begin. This is welcome. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our virtual open house here for November. We're virtual again, and I'm sure we will be next month in December. We get a lot of questions about when we're going to open again and bring people into the center. We're not sure about that. We're taking a look at options here for, for after the first of the year. So we'll keep you posted on that. We're hoping that we'll be able to do that as conditions change, things open up, vaccines get in circulation. And, we may do some things with social distancing restrictions in the center. We're looking at all those options. We'd love to be open. But in the meantime, we're doing the virtual open houses for those of you that have been following us during this time live. And then a lot of people watch us also on YouTube. So welcome to our session here this morning. And so what we're going to be doing today, sharing the latest photos and a couple of short videos of our displays accompanied by some narration along the way. So you can get a sense, if you've not been to the center before, you can get a sense for what it looks like. If you have been, it'd be a little bit of a trip down memory lane or an update for you. There's a bunch of things that we've done that are new that perhaps you haven't seen. We're also doing a segment today on building interiors. We know how important that is to have really good looking, striking models, add so much to what you're doing. And I know many of you have done interiors, we know that are on this call. So we're going to be showing you different building interiors, really in all scales, all the way from 1/6 scale, all the way down to HO scales, and what they look like and some of the techniques that we're using. You'll notice that there is the chat window there, the feature. And so if you have a question along the way, please feel free to jump in on chat and ask a question. And we'll try to get that answered during the webinar before we wrap up today. The third segment is really the second part of what we started last month with Dave Ravella and how to paint figures convincingly. And so we have some more video on that and some examples to show you and a lot of techniques that we can share. So our panelists this morning, I'm Jim Hopes from the center. We also have Dave Ravella with us. Frank Palmer is here as one of our panelists. Richard Smith is here. Keith Wolf is on the panel as well. John Addison, and we have a guest panelist this month, not exactly a guest at the center, but a guest as a panelist with Joe Crillo. So those are your hosts this morning as we go through our various discussions about what we're doing here. So let's begin. All right, so you know that what the center looks like if you've been here before. This is why we're not open today live, as opposed to what we're doing here virtually, because this is what it looks like. There are a lot of people. Generally, it's pretty crowded. And it's hard to maintain social distancing, and we probably have a higher risk group, as you can see. So we're looking at options again for after the first of the year to see when we might be able to reopen physically and think creatively about all of that. You know that we have 5 different operating train layouts here. The one you're looking at here is our latest edition. This is the Lakeshore Industrial Railway. This is the switching layout that people can actually operate. This is an O scale. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the program. There you can see Joe. He actually was working with our guests where we allow people to do switching and follow a particular switch list. So that's part of what we're doing here. One of the 5 layouts as we get to the Sundance Central. I'm sure many of you are familiar. That's the centerpiece, the 1 to 20.3 FN3 scale modular layout that's traveled the country, but has found a permanent home inside of the Suncoast Center for Finescale Modeling. You get a sense for what it looks like. The room, as we look down the right side of the space there, the various displays. You have both military modules that we have and dioramas, as well as what we're doing with the railroad side in various scales. You there see Charlie Belcher from Channel 13. He was, this was very early in the morning. He's prepared to do his morning show from here. This is on the other side of the Sundance Central, looking on down the left-hand side of the building. And we do have several shops back there where we do some work. A lot of the work we do on models, of course, is done at home, people in their own workshops, and we bring them to the center. But when we build a layout or do major work, we do build it in our shops. This is some of the early work on the we're doing with the Lakeshore Industrial Railway. We just looked at the O scale. We're building, there's the back shop, obviously working on putting the backdrop together, getting it mounted, things of that nature. And so we do a lot here. And so as we think about what happens in the center, because we've not been able, our last open house was in February. I want you to know that trains actually do still run at the center. So I thought I'd share a short videos about a minute and a half of a train operating here on the Sundance Central. I think you'll enjoy this. So this is the back-to-craft paper we put going onto our turntable. All of our locomotives are battery powered, lithium-ion batteries, air wire system for control, Phoenix sound. Now you see that our turntable is just like the real thing. It's the Armstrong turntable. It's like they did in the old days, although we have personally working one side making the turn. But you see that it's fully operational, the turntable is. And we'll back that locomotive into the engine house. Many of our units are equipped with an UTH smoke unit. That's what you see there. It produces a pretty good volume of smoke. All right, so there you go. There's our clip. And so, drop that, go back to here. So just a little taste. We're hoping again to be open sometime into 2021 or perhaps in first quarter. It will be good to see trains and hear trains run again at the center. And so you know that as our various layouts, regardless of the scale, almost all of our buildings are scratch built. Here's a good example. This is one that Richard did a number of years ago, the gas station, and then just on a cover of a national magazine. So you know, most everything is scratch built, and we try to get into detail. You'll see we do a lot here with figures as well. We're going to discuss that a little bit more, obviously in figure painting and some things that we're doing, but figures are important because many times you see really beautiful work, photographs of beautiful work. It's sometimes difficult to tell whether it's real or a model, but figures can often give that away. So figures are very important. And we, of course, have a mixture of train layouts. We have 5 operating train layouts in various scales. We do a lot, especially Dave, in the military space, military dioramas. You can see here that this is a close-up of the tank diorama. Dave, are you live there? Can you give us a couple of headlines about this?
Yeah, this is the 1/6 scale M10 tank destroyer based on a photograph that was taken in 1944 during the Battle of the Bulge. So this is just a recreation, miniature recreation of what was in the photograph.
Yeah, so if you look to the upper right-hand part of the picture, you see the building in the background there. Make a note of that because we're going to come back to that building. That's one of the interiors we're going to be showing you here in just a moment. Here's another photograph, the close-up. What about the detail on this? The guns, the ammo, where does that stuff come from, Dave?
Well, a lot of it's, some of it's scratch built. There are people out there that do a lot of 1/6 scale items now, but it seems to have kind of come and gone. The military stuff had a little heyday about, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, and has sort of drifted off since then. But I did manage to find a manual from the M10 tank destroyer listing all the equipment. So I did my best to add that detail to this. It's all about detail with us. So add the detail, and then you see the little things that make it humanize it: cigarettes and candy bars and magazines, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the soldiers were not necessarily neat. Huh?
They were boys.
Right. By the way, you see the building again in the background. We're going to be on the other side of that building here in just a minute or two. But I see you got the broken windows. How'd you do that?
Well, actually, I laser cut those. I actually thought about doing it in real glass, but because of the fact that we have children show up here,
yeah, right,
I thought that may not be a good idea. So they're actually, literally, I took photographs of broken windows and was able to put those into the laser cutter and actually cut glass based on real broken glass. It works out pretty well.
Yeah. All right, cool. All right, so John, I don't know if you can put your sound back on, but you see we got a picture here.
I'm here.
John Addison, you're adding some clouds to your backdrop, right?
Right. Yeah, I was adding clouds after the backdrop was, well, that one was never taken down. That was the first one I did, which was difficult because I didn't take it down, and I painted it actually with the foreground in my way, but it came out pretty good, and I was happy with it. And, yeah, I was just adding some clouds. I took away some clouds because I ended up getting too many up there, so I took away some later on.
Yeah, so what's the process for taking away clouds, John? How do you do that?
Well, what you have to do is you have to go back over and basically paint the mountain back where the cloud was is what you have to do. That's really the only way to take them away because, yeah, as you know, acrylic paints dry really fast, and in 5 minutes it's dry. So you really have to go back. You know, sometimes you got to look at it for a while to say, "Oh, right, there's too many clouds there, and I want to get rid of some of them." So that's what I did.
Yeah. If only the weatherman could do that. Yeah. All right, cool. So let's keep moving here. We also have some dioramas in HO scale. This is an HO diorama we have. This is Doug Fiscale, right? His one of the dioramas we have. I think this was one of his demonstration dioramas that he had at shows.
Yeah, it was this prototype model, and it's a Finescale model. So it's this company name, Finescale.
Okay. Yep. And so, yeah, so this is a shot that we had staged there with some HO locomotives, some things that I had weathered. We added a few birds in the background there. So we have HO dioramas as well. And so you'll see 5 different scales. And as we go through the interiors, you see some more shots of the center. But what all of the layouts have in common, whether it's a military diorama or whether we're doing something on the railroad side, is scratch build, highly detailed, weathered to the conditions, and bringing out a lot of shadows and highlights and textures and colors. And a big part of that, and making the models really pop on any layout, is adding interiors. And so we think about, what do we do each month on these things? Because a lot of you are here for month to month as you go through. What's a good thing to discuss? Model interiors and how to do them is really important. Okay, there's a lot that you can do to make a really beautiful model really come alive by putting an interior in there, putting the lights in there, getting the right contrast, etc. So we want to show you some examples here and discuss some of the techniques. So Dave, we're going to come back to you first. We're going to start in 1/6 scale. So this is on the other side of that wall we looked at with the tank diorama. So tell us what you did here. You already talked about how you did the glass.
Yeah, this is my one and only attempt at dollhouse modeling. Because our models are mostly seen all the way in 360 degrees, you have to add a lot of detail. So there is a photograph of this M10 that showed the front of the building, didn't show the back. So this was just basically me making an interior for a war-torn building in Belgium during the Battle of the Bulge. So I just, I scratch built all of the parts you see in there, all the windows. I did some laser cutting to create some of the details around the windows. I have some wallpaper up, and actually the painting that's there is actually of a Belgian painter. Couldn't tell you his name offhand right now, but I did a little research. Added a couple of rats to it, and it's just my version of the detail of a inside of a war-torn building.
So on the painting, you actually downloaded that from the internet and then printed it out?
I did, and I downloaded it on a piece of cloth, so it would look like it was done on, the kind of cloth they use for painting. Then used a little bit of texture to give it. So if you look at it, it actually looks like it could be hand painted.
So you were able to print on the cloth on what, your laser printer?
Yes. Yeah, they actually make cloth that you can buy it at different craft stores that you can run through an inkjet printer.
All right. And by the way, as you pull out on this a little farther, there's multiple stories. We're looking at the first story, obviously, but there's a second story above it, right?
Correct. And it's a cutaway view, obviously, because you can't, 1/6 scale building would be like building a doghouse, I think. So, had the upstairs, had the cutaway version, showing the upstairs, downstairs, the broken mirror, all kinds of little details that are destroyed, little teddy bears and things like that.
Okay. All right. So there in 1/6, obviously in large scale like this, you can do a lot of detail, right? You can put details on details to really to make it pop. But as we go down into some of these scales smaller than this, it's still pretty amazing the kind of detail you can get. Our next stop, our journeys here is going to be 1 to 20.3, which is FN3 scale. Okay, actually, narrow gauge would be the railroad part of it. 1 to 20.3 is the building. So Richard, we're going to come to you first. If you put your audio on there. Or do you want to add something, Dave? Okay, so we go to you, Richard. This is a depot on the Sundance Central. We're looking at the outside of it first. So give us a couple of headlines about this, Richard.
Basically, again, it's scratch built. All the stonework you see is actually cut from foam, and they were individually placed on the building facade and then colored and textured.
Yeah, so I was looking at the steps, like I guess those would have been cut stone steps. Is that foam? Is that what that is?
Yes, that's foam again.
Yeah, we
But
don't have,
on this are foam.
indeed, we don't have a lot of the parking lot that poured cement there in the picture, but use a method where you were taking plaster between wax paper and cracking it. How's that work?
Plaster of Paris, and then using put it on top of cheesecloth, spreading it very thin, let it dry. And as you pick it up, it actually cracks and gives you the effect of old concrete that's cracked.
Then you just
And
mount it
again,
and paint
when I
it
did
over the
plaster
detail.
of Paris, I added coloring to it, tint to get it more of the color of concrete.
Okay, so now you know what the building looks like. From the outside, let's go inside. We're looking at a window here. So tell us a little about what you did here, Rich.
Basically, the desk and the agent was writing out paperwork. In the background, you see people waiting for their plan to be on the passenger train. There's a old wooden stove in the middle to keep the people warm.
Yeah, there's a picture of the stove. Where'd you get the stove?
It's a detail part, and I can't remember where I did purchase that, but then I just weathered it up and gave it some detail to
Is that
bring it to.
casting? Is that what it is? Yeah, so what about the lamp there? Is that a dollhouse lamp?
That's a dollhouse lamp.
Yeah,
Actually work, it lights up.
right. So we managed to get, believe it or not, an iPhone in to shoot this through one of the openings of the building. So this is the guy at the desk. So it's a pretty good detail. Some of the picture cut off at the bottom. I see he's got some papers piled on the floor, right?
Yeah, there's a trash can. It's overflowing with paperwork. And this figure is actually a Chrysler figure.
Okay. Yep. And so I take it that that's a brad that's cut off. He's the nail there that he's putting those mortars on.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. So again, when you put more detail into it, the finer detail, it adds to the picture on the interior. That's one of the keys. It's just adding more detail. So Frank, we're going to come to next. This is Milroy's feed and grain. So tell us a little bit about this model. I got 3 shots we'll show here.
Okay, this is just the overall, the outside. There's the straw bales, hay bales are made from sisal rope that I cut up into a big pile and, like maybe 1/4 inch long pieces. And then I took a block of wood, put spray glue all over it, and rolled it around inside that pile of spray glue, or the sisal rope. Then the spray glue stuck all the fibers to it, and then I just kind of mushed them in nice and flat, and then put thread around it to simulate the wire baling.
Yeah,
And
so that sisal rope unraveled perfectly. You just cut the length you needed. Huh?
right, just chop it up with a pair of scissors.
All right, so we're going to go a little bit closer on this shot, Frank. So we got more detail.
All right, we got the chicken coop there and a cat climbing up the side of the chicken coop. There's a few figures in there. Dave painted several of them for me. And then we got a wash tub with a duck in it with her little ducklings. And then the bags of flour, potatoes, etc. And
Where did those come from, Frank?
I just tied up some, you can buy the bags. I don't know where I got them. It was so long ago I built this thing. But the bags were bought several years ago and they didn't have labels on them. And this is before I knew about of course, I bought the bag as an already stuffed bag, so I couldn't run it through the printer at that time. So I just ran paper through the printer and put some labels on it.
Okay, we're gonna go even a little bit closer here. Now we're looking at the chicken coop and the
Yeah,
cat.
there. Yeah. Okay, and then we got the Coca-Cola crate on top, which is a Hallmark ornament from Christmas.
Right. And so, one of the things we try to do when we're doing any display at the center, but certainly on these interiors, is to add some interest and some stories. So, people will come back multiple times and they say, the first time I came through, I didn't notice the chicken coop. And then when I looked at the chicken coop, I didn't notice that there was a cat on there trying to get to those chickens. And so, you try to build stories into what these displays are. So Frank, we have another story for you here.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so tell us about
Well,
this one. This is interesting.
Chester's sitting outside the old junk shop there, and there's a load of trains in the back for sale. And once again, those are the miniature Hallmark ornaments for Christmas. They're old Lionels, and they come out the right size for us. And
Yeah, this is 1 to 20.3. Now, did you do anything to paint them or weather them? Or
no, that's right out. I just took the hook off. That's all I did. Stuck them on the shelf. And we got various things in there, all kinds of details and things like that I've collected over the years. And some of it's made up. And the painting of the train is just a downloaded picture off the internet. And then we got old Festus there reading the overall catalog.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so again, lots of details and hanging together is a story. Black cat there right by the picture. So lots of things for people to look at to hold their interest. All right, we're still in 1 to 20.3. Now, this is a photograph through the window of what's that called? Frank's, what is it? Pool hall?
Yeah, that's a Dave thing.
Yeah, so we're actually looking at a pool table and a bar inside of the building. So tell us how this came about, Dave.
Well, it was actually inspired by something on the Muskrat Ramble. I just wanted, it's a 3-story building, and it's a pool hall in the bottom, and it's got the hotel rooms up at the top, and the pool room in the bottom. The pool table was an idea. I'm not even sure where I got that, but the balls on the pool table are just pins, the colored pins. I changed the colors on them, made them look like pool balls to go with the table. The cues they're just sticks. I basically sanded down to the size that they needed to be. And the image in the back, the bar image in the back, is literally just an image I copied off the internet, and it kind of fools the eye a little bit because you think you're in there, but it's
Yeah.
the back wall, all that chip painting, that's all a photograph.
That's a photograph?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. So there you go. I mean, even in 1 to 20.3, you can photograph that back wall, put it back there. A lot of people would think that you had done some sort of chipped painting technique to make that happen.
Would have been a really good one by me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now let's switch scales, keep going down. We started with 1/6, then we went to 120.3. Now we'll go to 148, essentially O scale. And so you mentioned a moment ago, Dave, was this the building on the Muskrat Ramble that inspired you to do the pool table?
It is one of the buildings. There's two buildings that inspired it. But yes, it's one of the buildings and one of the scenes in it. And I couldn't tell you how they did their pool table.
Yeah, but this is 148, this O scale. You might think that you're looking at a photograph if you think about it from a modeler's perspective of the pool table, but that's an actual pool table in there. I don't know if they use the same push pins. This was actually built in Australia, right, by the group there for the Muskrat Ramble, but they found something that looked like pool cue balls, et cetera, as well. And you can see, I just noticed in this photograph, it does come with a large insect. It's a little bit out of scale, but we'll go past that. And so, yeah, that's looking through the window. You can see what a difference that makes. Here we are, we're still in the Muskrat Ramble. And so we're looking through, and this is, I think this is the general store, right? And so basically, because what they're modeling here in this particular layout is Southwest Mississippi, the bayou. And so and I think many of them did without ever coming to the United States and did a really good job. But you can see the kind of details in there that when you look in, and the lighting, all right, the lighting is appropriate. It's the right hue, the right color, and it's not overly obtrusive. So, all right, so Joe Carrillo, you're one of our panelists here. This is a building that you built, scratch built in O scale. Give us a couple headlines about this.
Well, this is a depot up in Bigelow Junction, Maine. And it's actually a Mount Blue model that I kit bashed, and it didn't have any interior. And all my research, I couldn't find an interior for it. So I talked to the guy that designed the kit, and we kind of came up with an idea of what the interior should look like.
All right, so here's a shot. Now you built this building so the roof's removable, right?
Right. A lot of my interiors have really a lot of detail. And in O scale, I laminate HO 1x8s and 1x10s for the walls to the back of the scribe wood to give that feeling of board by board, and then put the individual studs in. So it looks like it was actually built like that, not just, sheet wood.
Yeah, so those 16 inches or 24 inches on center?
Yeah. I have a little jig I made up, and as I put a stud in, I laid a jig in, laid the next stud up, and then moved the jig down one stud.
Yeah, and what'd you do on the floor?
That is individual O scale 1x8s and just Minwax.
Okay.
Stain.
Yep, here's another shot of the interior with that roof off, so it's a different angle, right?
Yeah. Just
Yep.
kind of an imaginary ticket office.
Right. And then this building here, tell us a little bit about this one.
That is a early Bar Mills kit, the Majestic Hardware, and it actually had no interior or anything. And this side only had just a 30-inch door on it. So I added two load and bay doors so I could actually do an interior. And there's a partitioned area off that's a general store in there also. You might have some pictures of that too.
Now, we are looking into the building at this point, and that is the actual interior that we can see through those two openings, right?
Right, and if you look into the back end, it's walled off, and there's a store in there also, kind of a little hardware store.
Right. And so the lights you have, obviously the lights make this come alive because we wouldn't be able to see that interior without the lights. We're using LEDs, is what you're using?
It's all LEDs, and just experiment around with the right size resistor for the brightness you want.
Right. Okay, so here's another shot, a little bit darker scene, but you can see how the lights bring that out. We can actually see through the guy standing, we can see through the boxcar there.
And I also played around with that Luminaire photo program you talked about last month.
Yeah.
And I just added a little sky backdrop to it.
Yeah, nice job. I recognize that. Absolutely. Brings a lot to the photograph. Okay, now we're going to go back to that same loading dock, but there's another shot looking through into the interior, right?
Right, that interior section you can see is only about 2 inches deep, actually.
Right. And the one on the right, there's a set out, there's a room that's actually making that
Right.
more shallow, right?
The hardware store is.
Right. And tell us about this one.
That is a scratch-built car shop that was in Kingfield, Maine. And that's all board-by-board construction. And I thought I'd add a little interest to have a Maine narrow gauge 2-foot boxcar under construction in there.
Right. Yep. Okay. Yeah, that's a very cool scene. Now the next one, tell us what this is. I know, but tell us.
That is just a screenshot I grabbed off the internet. I was looking for hardware store interiors, and I grabbed maybe 10 to 20 shots and then print them up really crudely and resize them and put them behind the windows and just kind of see what works and what doesn't work. And when I find one that works, I laminate it to like the very thin, paper thin styrene, and then put it behind the window so it's kind of inert and it won't warp over time.
Right. Yeah, so a little bit of a shadow box effect.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking a lot about that. You'll be seeing this in the next few minutes as we get especially down into the scale. Shadow boxes can be really effective in bringing your interiors popping right outside of the building. So you still got the watermark from the original owner of the photograph, but hey,
That
you don't
gets
notice that.
edited out there eventually.
Yeah, right. You don't notice that in the building so much. Yeah. So, speaking of shadow boxes, all right, those of you that have been to the center know that this is an O-scale building, 7 stories, about 2.5 feet tall. And I scratch built that using the DPM panels. And so, I wanted a brick warehouse building like this, but I also wanted something where it was coming alive with some lighting and some interior. And so you can see, what we've done here. I put shadow boxes in there. Again, downloading photographs from the internet, finding the right ones. There's a closer look. If you look in those windows, you can see. And basically, I did much like what Joe described, went in and did a Google search for factory interiors. And anytime you do search for a photograph that you're going to put inside of a building, so for interior, the trick is to find a shot that is straight on as opposed to an angle. Most photographs and good photography technique would have you shooting at an angle, but if it's going to make it look like the building goes off to an angle, it's kind of difficult. So I had to go through probably hundreds of photographs to find these. They're in shadow boxes, and here you can see how I built it. This is a low relief building, about 2.5 inches deep. And so basically, those are the shadow boxes that I built. The black you're seeing there is, some black cardboard, like poster cardboard, essentially heavy poster cardboard, and built the shadow boxes, putting them in place with some tape, a little bit of glue at the base, some yellow glue. And then, the photographs are mounted on the back that you see through the windows. And I've got them all wired up with the LEDs. And so you get the effect of, some rooms in the building being occupied and lit and others not. But that's some basic construction technique. It's pretty easy to build the shadow boxes and keep them in place if you got a good structure around the building. Here's another example. This is an O-scale building that we have. It's on the Lakeshore Industrial Railway. And we got it. I think that Tim Godfrey found this actually on eBay. We were looking to add some buildings quickly. So went and added some details, some weathering, some signage, et cetera. But this thing literally on the right-hand side, I think it's about an inch thick. It's only a half an inch thick on the left-hand side. We wanted to create some depth as you looked into those particular openings on the bay, as though there's something behind there. So these are photographs, again, that, I found. It's a pretty close-up picture here, but it gives you the sense that when you're looking at the building, it goes beyond what we're seeing just on the building front and has depth. There's an example there. There's another example looking in. Again, it's always tricky to find photographs that go straight from front to back and not off to an angle, so you don't distort the view. When you find them and put them in, I think those shadow boxes are less than an inch deep, 3/4 of an inch, if I recall. And then there is a light above. And this is Brian Nolan's work. This is an O-scale. We have to argue that this is probably the most detailed interior that we have, and maybe the same for the interior we have on the 20.3 engine house and Dave's engine house. But Dave, tell us a little bit about this. I think this was a contest winner, if I recall.
Yeah, it won Best of Show National Narrow Gauge. I think it was in Michigan. Dearborn, yeah, Dearborn. And this is, Brian Nolan was a friend of mine and not really a member of the center, but he passed away several years ago, and his family allows us to display his work here. The incredible thing about Brian was he was colorblind. So, and of course, his detail in this thing is just, there's no photographs in here. This is all detail. So he spent a long time making this one up.
Yep, it's wonderfully, and you see what makes it, obviously the lighting is good. It's hard to believe he was colorblind, but every little detail, that's what a crowded shop would look like, stuff everywhere. And that's what helps to bring it alive. Let's keep our journey going down into smaller scales. So now we're into S scale, 1/64. So John, you're going to be up for this one. This is one of the buildings you have on your Silverton Central at the center. I just got a shot of a couple of stories there where we can see the interiors.
Yeah, this is my Frank Palmer building, and it's a tribute to him and his wife. And the interiors in there are all they're all done with the floors and stuff are all out of cardstock, And most of the walls inside are cardstock laid over wood. So can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. And basically that's, you just stain it, paint it, and score lines in it to make it look like planking on the floor and that kind of thing. There's another example of it right there. This building was designed by Frank, and it wasn't designed to have an interior, but I wanted it to have one. So again, I used the cardstock to form the walls and form the floor. And I painted it and stained it. When you stain it with artist oils, especially, that brings out all the detail that you put into it. It sounds like it's a tedious thing, but it really isn't tedious to do. It really goes pretty quick. And you brace it up with wood behind it so it doesn't warp or anything like that.
Now, when you say use cardstock on the walls, you didn't print it. How did you get the wood grain?
No, I actually take the cardstock, I glue two thin pieces together, and then I paint both sides of it a typical wood color. And then I score all the wood grain and the planking lines in there. And then when that's done, I stain it with artist oils, especially Payne's Gray, and a wash of odorless mineral spirits, and that kind of finds all the capillaries of all the wood and stuff, and then the detail really jumps out at you.
Right.
And
So it's all X-Acto knife, putting all that in there.
right.
Cool. So let's keep moving here, John. Now, this is a new one you're working on. By the way, nice bolt castings on that sign.
Dave Revella did that for me on a laser.
Yeah. So this is what the exterior of the building. You're still working on this, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm working on this at home. Right.
So this was the base, the floor?
Yeah, the floor, the stage, and the bar were all done with cardstock. Yeah. So.
Okay. And so as we keep looking now, I guess this is you put the floor in the building here?
Yeah, I put the building, see how it looks. I've got a bunch of people to add in front of there with tables and chairs, and I got a bar room fight that's going to take place. And I got to put all that where you can actually see it when you look in the building. And the building has to be lit really well, because otherwise you're not going to be able to see a lot of the detail in there. There's another overview of the building.
Right. Yep. Cool.
So,
you are the cardstock man, John. That's some pretty amazing work. It sure looks like wood.
yeah, it's kind of old school modeling. I think that people used to do it years ago, and I just kind of experimented with it, and I kind of like the way it looks. I just kind of went with it from there and stuff. It's I mean, as long as you brace it up really good with wood, it doesn't warp or anything like that.
Right. Okay, so let's move on to HO scale. I know many of you are HO scale modelers that are viewing this. So what can you do in HO? And the answer is a lot. It does make a difference. This happens to be an HO building that's on my layout here at home. It's actually built by Tim Godfrey. The building was. And so I wanted to add an interior to it. You can see a couple different shots here. If you look through those windows, what we're looking at, you see the pharmacist, this is Rexall Drugs, in the right-hand corner. The whole back wall basically was a photograph that I was able to download from the internet and then essentially glue that on the back wall. Everything you see in the foreground is their actual shelves with material and castings and things of that nature. And so the reality is I didn't have a bunch of castings for a drugstore interior, but had a lot of castings for workshops and things of that nature. So I took some of those castings and I looked at photographs. What do you see on the shelves? And basically what you see on the shelves in any drugstore are a lot of different products with bright multiple colors. And so essentially put together those things. So when you look in the building, it looks like there's a lot on the shelves and people don't necessarily look at it and recognize it as something that would be industrial. It sort of comes together. Now, on the second story, you can see that only certain rooms are lighted. If we go back here, you can see we have those two rooms that are lighted. And so here's a close-up on that. There's a company called Roomettes, you may know about them in HO, where they create specific interiors or interiors for specific buildings. This was not necessarily created for this particular building, but this is a box, a shadow box. What they're doing is they're laser cutting cardstock much like you're talking about, John, and then printing the details on there, in this case, a rug, and the details of the room. So when you see it in the building, you know, it shines through. You see the one on the right as well. It looks like there are lights on in the building. You can see some of the interior details. And speaking of roomettes, this is I think it's a DPM kit, this hotel kit. But the roomettes are in the first floor here. This roomette for the first floor for both the left portion and the right portion were made for this building specifically. Pretty easy to put together, actually. And they have all the slots and all the tabs so they fit into your building. You just add the lights. Now, the stuff I did above that first floor, those are just some various lighting techniques and some window curtain things that you paste onto your windows, et cetera. Here's a close-up look of what that first floor looks like. It's pretty cool. There's another company out there in HO called Electric Wallpaper. I haven't looked at their stuff yet, but I just saw them in RMC. And so they're making some interiors for specific buildings. But all you do, and by the way, they even give you the LEDs that you should use and have a place to mount on the top of the shadow box. So it's not available for every building. Here's one where it wasn't available, so I just made my own with Starbucks, you know, printed out the hardwood floor and, you know, used some cardstock to build the counter. And you see it's a multiple story building. As you get to the top, there are some offices up there. And so we're looking through, the man looking out the back, the window on the back of the building, standing in front of his office. If you've ever watched Mad Men, that's Don Draper looking out of his office, in that case in Manhattan. So I just took that photograph and made it part of the interior. So the reality is you can do this. We don't have any N scale examples for those of you in N scale, but you could probably do this as well. Having interiors and having these things lighted really brings the models alive and makes for a really compelling scene as you put these together on your layout. So hopefully you've gotten some ideas there. And if you have any more, just put them in questions, just put them in the chat and we will be happy to answer those. All right, so we want to move on to our segment here on figure painting. Last month we did the first segment with Dave on how to paint scale figures. And this is the second segment with some additional details on how he gets those done. So Dave, just give us a couple headlines about some of the basic tools in case somebody missed it last month.
Well, these are obviously little paint trays that I use. I use aluminum foil to line them, so cleaning up after is easier than having to wash them all out. I just take the cheapest tin foil I can buy and very thin. I line them, and then when you're all done, you just kind of pick them up, throw them away. And of course, this is all about brushes. I typically use a Kolinsky Sable brush from 4O brushes to probably a number 1 or my most common ones. And they can be a little bit difficult to find, but a good set of brushes can last you years if you take care of them.
One thing I've heard you say, Dave, is this is not an area to cheap out.
Yes, yeah. This is you want a brush that can hold its shape.
Right, right.
And then of course I do all my figure painting in mostly acrylics. Sometimes I do some accents with oils, but mostly all of it's acrylics. The advantage to acrylics is it dries very fast. The colors don't darken with age, and it's friendly. There's no issues with cleanup or getting it on your skin or anything of that nature. And I always mount figures some way in which I can hold the figure without touching the figure while I'm painting it. In this case, it's just an old piece of dowel rod. I put a little pin in the end of the bottom of the foot, kind of super glue it down with just a tiny bit of super glue, holds it in place long enough. And then I use the pin that's in the bottom to actually install it wherever I'm going to put it on the diorama or layout.
So the idea here is whenever you're painting that figure, you never touch it.
Never touch it. Try never touch it again.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. By the way, this is one of the figures as you know, from if you've been to our previous webinars, we've been on a journey here with 3D printing. We're making some pretty good progress. This is one of the figures that we printed out, right?
It is correct. It's one of the 19. Actually, we're up to about, I don't know, we must be 24, 25 figures that would be available for purchase in various scales in the future here.
Yeah, so you painted several. This is one you painted just a couple weeks ago, right?
That is correct. That's one of the, this happens to be printed in 120, but it can be printed all the way down into, I've printed them all the way down into S scale so far, and they print okay. So it will be available as part of the group. And then what will happen with this one in the large scale, that what looks like a broom in his hand will be detachable. So if you don't want to use that and you want to put some other tool in his hand, you'll be able to do that in the large scale figures. Another one, this one actually had a scythe in its hands, which the figure will be sent with, but if you don't want to use it for that, I just stuck a rope in here because he's on a steam donkey. Figure that would be a good photograph.
Yeah, so let's look at how we get those shadows and highlights and all the folds and the close. That'll be our next segment. So I'm going to start your video here, and then if people have questions along the way, put them in the Q&A section, and then Dave will get a couple more words as we wrap this up.
Hi, I'm Dave Ravella. Welcome to my world of figure painting. During this session, all right, we're going to move on to shadows and highlights now. Shadows and highlights are, I have fundamentally do them, I believe I said before, from the same basic colors I made the flesh. In the case of the shadows, I use one less color. I'm using dark red and the English uniform to create the shadow color. The shadow colors, if you notice, if you look at somebody in natural light, you'll see shadow lines like under their neck, there's a slight shadow under their eyebrows, just above their eyelids. There's shadows that you're trying to mimic. There's also some lines kind of naturally done between their hairline and their like their ear and around the front of their face. We're going to try to recreate those lines, and once again, you're sort of faking the eye out when you do it with paint to make it look like there are shadows when they're in fact not shadows, or you're trying to control the end result. So I'm taking just a tiny bit of the red. In fact, I'm taking a little bit more red, the dark red, than I am the English uniform. It's probably a 60-40 mix. And I'm going to take and mix those two together. And if I'm successful, I've come up with a slightly dark brown line that would complement the flesh. Now what I can do is if I feel like this is a little bit too dark, I can go back to my base color, my flesh, bring some over and mix it in. Now this one needs to have a couple of drops of water in it because you want it to be somewhat transparent when it goes on the figure, all in hopes that you don't get a really super hard line between the darks and the lights or the base color. So this dark, once again, I would go under the chin, one of the first things, create the line. Middle of the ear is another place that needs to be a little bit darker because we'll go back later and highlight the outside of the ear. Along the neckline in the back, you can run a little bit. Along the edge of the face, a little bit darker between the lips, and then a little tiny bit of a shadow line on either side of the nose, up into either side of the nose, up into this part of with the bridge of the nose right here. That's a little bit darker. And then one more spot that I typically hit, and that's above the eye, below the eyebrow. That becomes a spot that requires a little bit of shading. Now, this guy has a smile line. It's also good to accentuate the smile line with just a tiny bit of the dark. If it gets to be a little bit too much, you'll go back and adjust it later with some of the other colors you're using. Now, it's not great. Now, in addition to that, you'll see that he's got his hands up. He's got creases in his hands. He's got the joints between them. I would also take the dark at this point in time and create those shadows in the hand between the fingers. Go to the back of the hand, do the same thing, and create these subtle effects that create the shadows for the flesh parts. Also along the edge of the clothing. Where the clothing meets, you get a separate line there. I often, especially in smaller figures, it works really well, create this sort of a dark line between the two. Okay, he's basically had the dark shadows. Now, once again, you can go with first shadows, second shadows. You can make it even a little bit lighter, a lighter shade of the dark or darker, and then the lights. But you can't, on a figure of this scale, a lot of that's kind of wasted effort because you won't appreciate it when you're finished figure. So what I'm going to do next are the lights. Now, typically I start out with the sunny skin tone. I'm going to take it straight from the bottle, put it in here, take just a little bit of the base color, bring it over from this tray, this dimple in the tray, over to here, mix the two together. This is my first light. And once again, this needs to be a thinner mixture, not a thicker mixture. So I want to make sure it has probably at least 2 to 1. It's fairly thin. You can see that from the way it goes onto the rag. And then when I go to the figure, I want to pick the highlights. I want to pick, you know, the tip of the nose, the cheeks of your face. The forehead tend to all be a little bit sunnier or brighter on a person. So I want to start there as places to highlight. As I do this, it's reasonably transparent. And when you're up this close, it kind of looks kind of harsh sometimes. But when you draw back from it a little bit, they sort of blend a little bit better to the eye. So the overall appearance is exactly what you're trying to get. I'm almost at the point right now I'm actually putting tiny little dots of paint where I want them. And by the time they dry, you will start to see this figure. It's very apparent in his hand because it's way out front. Along the edge of his fingers, along his knuckles, I just put too much paint on, but I'll fix that later. And he's had his first lights put on. So now we're going to move from this first light, and I'm going to do a tiny bit of a second light on his face, which is just going to be a combination of that sunny skin tone and a little bit of this flesh color, this white flesh color. So I'm going to take the time to mix that up. While we're doing this, he's drying enough that by the time I get this done, and I'm going to use such a tiny little bit of this, I don't have to take a whole tray. So I'm going to put just a little bit in the middle. Well, I thought it was going to be a little bit. I'll separate that out a little because I put a little too much in there. But then I'll take a bit of this sunny skin tone and add it to it. Kind of knocks the edge off of it, draws the colors together better. And I want to make sure it's nice and wet. That's quite a bit of paint. But I want it to be reasonably transparent so that when I put it on there, it's not like a harsh white dot on his face. Now I'm going to take the really highlights, the really edge of the edge of his nose, the high points of his face, and I'm going to add just a little tiny bit of this to that, and hopefully that causes that illusion to the eye that it makes it look like it's the high points on his face. Tip of his nose, his 2 cheeks. At the end of it, you can actually put a little rosy color on a cheek if you want. This guy's got a prominent chin, so I'm going to do a little bit on the base of his chin. And there you have first lights done on this and second lights done on this. And he's now, the facial features are beginning to pop out at you. They're looking a little bit more like this one. Okay, we have done the flesh parts. We've done the dark on the lights and on the flesh, created the eyes, and we're ready to move on to the next layer of clothing, which is the shirt. For that, I picked 2 colors. It's going to be sort of a light neutral kind of color with some shading to it. We'll start with these 2 colors. In this particular case, this is a navy green, and this is a pearl gray. Same thing, mix them, make sure they're all nice and mixed up. I'm going to take just about equal drops of each one. This becomes the base. From this, you might want to put just a tad bit more than you would normally because this becomes the color that you add to other colors as you proceed. So I'm going to take and once again dilute it. Just 1 drop of water this time because it is the base color. Mix it. Now, The bib overalls are going to be a dark color, so if you get a little bit of this on the bib overalls, the dark color covers it pretty nicely. So you don't have to be quite that neat, but you do around the flesh. And this was a #1 brush that I used on this, by the way, because I'm not down to the fine detail yet. Okay, he has his first coat for the shirt. He's going to be set down to dry for a few minutes, and then we're going to put the second coat on of the base color. The figure's had its second coat of the base color for the shirt, and now we're ready to do the darks. The dark in this case is just a emerald gray, another gray color, and a little bit of kind of an Oxford blue. This is a model color paint, but this is off a formula that I've gotten from one of those recipes in the book that I showed you earlier. So I'm going to stick with it a little bit. It's just going to, nice little touch of a different color. Now what I want to do is take just a little bit of these two colors themselves, and then I'm going to take a bit of the base and scoop some up from one location, from that the base location, and I'm still with the #1 brush here at this point. I'm going to put it in here and I'm going to mix it all together, and once again thin it. Now it's got this one, it looks a little bit too purple for me right now, so I'm just going to add just a touch more of this gray to it, this blue gray to it. There we go. Some more water, thin it. And unload the brush, and I'm ready. Okay, at this point in time, I'm looking for all the folds in the shirt. Going to try to give them some definition. This first round of doing these folds, I'm sticking with this larger brush, this #1. Later on, I'll switch to a smaller brush because it helps me get into the finest little detail when I start doing the final little touches to the shirt. I'm also doing something called outlining. I'm going around the areas where two different dissimilar things like the straps to the overalls meet the shirt, and I'm putting shadow in there just to sort of give it a little definition, a visual definition when you see it in the eye. And shadows. Under the armpits would be a darker area, so I put a little bit darker under there. Edges of the collar would have the same situation. There. First shadows are done on this shirt. Okay, I'm going to take a little of the base color. We're going to start the lights. I'm going to do the base color. The base color consists of the base plus a tiny bit of beige. Just a littlest drop of this. We're going to lighten this up just a little bit. And a little bit of white. Mix. Gonna add water. This time 2 drops. Check the consistency. And start on the highlights. I'm gonna take the high parts of the shirt and just put a little bit of this top of the collar, top of the shoulders. You sort of have to study how light falls on things. All right, that's the technique. And then I'd go over that several times like this, to let that dry for a couple seconds, then go back over it again. And then I would follow that by going back over with the darks one more time to see where the areas I hit, probably picking up a smaller brush to do so, back and forth on this all this time to make this a contrast between the highlights and the shadows, and all the time trying to make it look like it's a sort of a natural transition so that it's not too hard. In the end, you end up with a figure that's about this much contrast on it. This kinds of darks and lights, and you can sort of pick up the folds in the shirt, and that's the whole object here. we've completed the shirt with the lights and the darks. It's ready to go. Now we're going to move on to the overalls. The overalls are sort of following this chart of colors that we had, where we had the base, which I've got right here. I've got the light color and the dark color, and I've sort of mimicked these in this. These paints are already mixed in the palette, ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the base color. This is a pretty quick coat. It's probably going to have to be done twice. And you can do this with a fairly large brush. Number 1 brush works fine for it. Later on, some of the details are going to have to be added with a 2.0 brush or a 3.0 brush, depending on how much detail you want to pop out at you. Just got to get around the base of his legs here a little bit, and the first coat's on. Now there's an interesting little side effect of having such thin paint, at least in this particular case, is that when you put the first coat on, it's essentially done now. When you first put the first coat on, the creases and the dark parts actually look darker because of the collection of the amount of paint. That's a good indicator for your next level when you do the darks on these, as to where some of the paint will go to fall into the folds, the natural folds of the overalls he's wearing. So we're going to let this one dry, and then I'm going to apply a second coat, and then we're going to move on to the darks. I've applied the second coat, and it's dried, and now we're ready to move on to the darks on this one. The paint is already in the palette, so we're just going to go straight to it. I'm still using the number 1 brush because some of the folds are rather large, and I can cover a large area in a short time. And I'm just going to find all the creases that I can find, all the areas of shading, kind of trying to picture what it would look like in the natural light. And I'm just going to add the dark. Also, I'm going to emphasize underneath the pockets. He's got some pockets, rear pockets on this. Inside the top of the pocket is an opportunity for some shadowing. And lots of folds in this particular casting. Also, there are creases, or there are actually seam lines where the outfit was essentially sewn together that would call for some shading too, so I'll add some to there. So before I get too carried away though, I'm going to jump to the lights, and that'll help define what other areas of darkness is going to be required. So that's done. I'm ready to jump right into light. So little paint was used on that particular case that I'm able to move from one to the other rather rapidly when I get to this phase. So highlights, tops of creases, folds and pants all require more light highlighting. And as you do that, all of a sudden you start to see that all the different features of this figure begin to jump out at you. Become visually very apparent that this guy has got a wrinkly pair of overalls on, where before, when it was all one color, you couldn't discern those colors very well with your eye. And between the fact that I shadowed the interior and I sort of highlighted the exterior of them, gives the appearance of dimension and difference in areas of the overalls here. That's what you do, going backward and forth. That's my first light. Now, what I might want to do is take just a little bit more of this, add just a tiny bit more beige to it when I get over this, and then go back to it again, and I would just highlight the very tips of things again, the very highest points on creases, to make them stand out just that little bit more. This figure is, its scale says that you could do a little bit more bold things to it to have it visually look okay to you. Outlining would be where you want to emphasize the difference between the shoulder strap of the overalls and the shirt. And that's simply drawing a line where the two meet in a very dark color. In this case, I'll use this almost black blue, thin it just a hair. with a very 4-aught brush, and then I will take and draw with the steadiest hand I can. I will draw a line on the figure next to the two, and it will cause a big contrast between the blue of the overalls and the gray of the shirt, visually attracting your eye to it. Now I can actually do it. The collar is another good example of being able to do that. I've drawn a line pretty much underneath the collar and the rest of the shirt so that the collar jumps out a little bit. We have taken the figure to the point of being, the closing is essentially done on this. I have done the base on the overalls. We've done the highlights. We've done the darks on it. It's ready to go to the next piece, which would be the finishing touches. He has a hammer in his hand, which needs some finishing, and he has work boots on. For the work boots, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some dark brown and create the base leather for it. Now, in this particular case, I don't need to use, it's just one color, not going to use a lot of it, so I can put it on the outside of the dimples in the palette, get a little bit of water in it, and fairly quickly paint shoes. And that's all it takes to paint the shoes. Now for the handle of the wood of the hammer, I'll just take a lighter brown and I'll create the handle. First coat on that, I'll put another coat on it because it's kind of thin right now. But already I'm ready to go back to the shoes, which that first coat of brown is dried. Now to give a worn effect for shoes, what you can do is take almost an orangey brown, take a little bit of it, thin it. This time I just need whatever comes off the brush to thin. Mix it a little bit, and then transparently go over the top of the shoes in worn areas like the toes would wear. The heels would have some wear on them. You can put a little orangey brown there. Contrast it enough that it actually, in the transparent nature of it, makes it start looking like worn leather. It's kind of a neat little trick with this. I use it quite a bit with leather to make it look like it's just been around a while, scuffed up, worked on. The same orangey brown works in black, not just this color. Has that sort of scuffed areas of shoes. And then you've got contrast. Pretty much the only thing I have left to do, and I can do that very quickly with a little black, is to paint the top of the hammer. I'll start out with a very stark black, but I want the hammer to look worn. So when that black dries, we will tone it down a little bit with probably, I can use any of these flesh tone colors actually are good for causing you to, when you thin them down, to make a dark object look a little bit less stark. So it needs a couple minutes to dry and then we can finish that piece right there. All right, we're to the last phases of this figure. We've done the face, the shirt, the overalls, the shoes. We did the basic coloring for the hammer, and the last thing that we did on it was create the hammerhead, which is rather dark. It's a dark black. So what I want to do with that is I'm going to take a little bit of this flesh tone color, and I'm going to water it down, just a drop of it. I'm going to use a very small brush, but I'm going to dilute it quite a bit, and then use that to tone down the color of it. And you'll see that this flesh tone color, quite handy actually has an effect of making these things that should be made out of metal look like they are sort of worn, and that's pretty much it. Now, if I wanted to do one more thing with this guy's hammer, is the fact that the hammer itself is, or the hammer handle itself is rather pristine. So I could take a color such as this orange brown, which is a little bit lighter. Actually, I have a little bit left from when we painted earlier. And I can take a little bit of this orange brown and highlight just a tone on the edge of it, which when it's dry would give you the look that it's sort of worn in spots. In the in-between, we have done this figure basically using the same colors that I did this HO figure in. He's in overalls. He's HO, obviously. He's smaller. He was done in much quicker fashion with much the same technique, but he didn't take as much time, and he also has outstanding features to him as opposed to what you would get from either a pre-painted figure or a figure done with just straight paints and no tones and no highlights and shadows. All right, so we've covered the basics of painting with acrylics for figures. The things to remember are that you need good brushes, that you need good paints, the materials and supplies. You need to learn to unload your brushes. That helps with control. The coloring is done in such a way that you have the base color, a shadow color, a highlight. They complement each other. You use thinned out versions of those. The big thing to remember with figure painting, I was frustrated with this as I was with other colors. Initially, I just kind of stuck to it. And one day I turned a corner and I was able to paint better than I had before. And I looked at a face after I'd done it and go, I nailed it. That's the one I wanted to paint. Same thing happens here. It's practice, practice, practice. If you continue that up, you'll improve your game, your figures will get better, and it just adds to your total modeling experience.
Okay, Dave, can you turn your audio back on? We got a couple questions here people like to have answered.
Sure.
Yeah, so we're looking at these examples here, several things it looks like. So basically, you're saying if you look at these things really close, it might look a little dramatic, some of the effects, just a little bit like stage makeup when you're viewing from 3 or 4 feet. That's what you have to do to get the contrast.
Yeah, typically the smaller the scale, the little bit bolder the process is. In other words, the larger, the 120 figures, I have to spend more time blending so that you don't get hard lines between things.
Okay.
On smaller scales, because you look at, a scale footage away from them, if they're too subtle in their transitions, they don't pop out at you. So, like I said, the smaller the scale, you look at them from a distance, they look a little better. Now, if you look at them really close, you go, wow, those are really hard lines. But if you're trying to get that effect when you're doing a diorama or layout or something of that nature, you don't want to be too subtle with the smaller scales.
So we're looking for color, contrast, highlights, shadows.
Always, in everything we do, including figures. I've often asked about washes. A lot of people do washes. I don't do washes I shouldn't say that. I do very controlled washes. The problem with the washes is these figures and these scales, these smaller scales are so poorly made that the wash ends up going into every defect there is. If you actually learn to paint them, you can actually get around defects by painting the detail on them. So washes are used, but they do things to create shadows. And like if you did a chain link or not chain link, but the armor, the old, what do they call that, chain mail stuff they used to put on for armor and things. You can do some washes and things like that, but typically there's no washes.
Okay, we had another question saying, Dave, after your final painting, do you seal the figure with dull coat or varnish?
I do add dull coat to them. It's not always necessary, but since they have to be handled a little bit when you try to install them, it's always good to put some dull coat on them. The acrylic paints are very flat, and that's a good thing. You don't want them all shiny, but they're also very thin. So if you have to handle them at all, you risk the chance of wearing the paint right off of them.
Okay. By the way, the full-length DVD on this as well, it's a 48 minutes, something like that. We just have some excerpts here. That DVD we do have available. We don't have it on eBay listed, and we don't have it on our website specifically, but if somebody wanted to get that DVD, if you want one, just send us a note, an email, whatever. Go to our website, finescalemodeling.org. There's a way to contact us, and we can get you there. It's like $19.95 plus some shipping if we ship it to you. But if you want to get into this in a big way, in a more detail, that full DVD is available. And also, we post these webinars we're doing on our YouTube channel as well, all the previous ones, and this will be posted probably by the end of the day tomorrow. If you want to go back and look at certain parts of it or share it with other people if you think they might enjoy it, please feel free to share the YouTube channel link. We generally get 3 or 4 times more views on YouTube than we do even live when we do these webinars. But this is our YouTube channel, the Suncoast Center for Fine-Scale Modeling. A lot of the videos that we use in these webinars are on there. If you like it, be sure and hit the like button. If you want to subscribe, then we'll show up in your YouTube feed. And hit the bell button, and you'll get an email notification whenever we post something new. And obviously, feel free to share it with all of your friends, as we're trying to share the hobby and get people more involved. And then, of course, here's our site, finescalemodeling.org. If you've been there, there's a mailing list. If you're not on it, you can sign up for it. I think most of you are. Directions from when we allow people in at some point, the events, and then we have an online gift shop. So we appreciate all of you hanging with us. We went a little bit longer again today, but some good detail and hopefully some good methods that you can use, that you can put into practice. So again, look for it on the YouTube channel, and look for us again next month. The third Saturday a month, we'll be doing another virtual house. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next month.